Mom laughed at my pointless hobbies. Said get a real job. I turned my passion into a global brand. She begged for a position. I made her my assistant. Story 1. I grew up in a tiny town called Alabaster Ridge, Montana. It's one of those places where everybody knows your business, and the biggest event of the year is the county fair. My mom, Valencia, is the kind of woman who lives for appearances. She's sharp, opinionated, and has never been shy about saying exactly what's on her mind. Growing up with her was, let's just say, a challenge. Mom had this very clear idea of what success looked like. You go to college, get a degree, land a real job, and climb the corporate ladder. That was her gospel. Anything outside of that box was a waste of time. And guess what? My entire personality was outside that box. Ever since I was a kid, I loved creating things. I wasn't like other kids in town who spent their weekends fishing or playing sports. I was the weird kid who stayed in his room building tiny models of famous buildings out of toothpicks and glue. The Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum, even the Empire State Building. I loved it. Mom didn't. She used to call them my little craft projects with that tone parents use when they're trying to pretend they're not embarrassed by you. At first, I didn't care. I was just a kid having fun. But as I got older, her comments started cutting deeper. When I turned 13, I got into customizing sneakers. It started small. I had this beat-up pair of white Nikes, and one day, I decided to paint them. I spent hours on it, turning them into something colorful and unique. When I wore them to school, people noticed. A couple of kids even asked if I could do the same for their shoes. That's when the idea first hit me, maybe I could turn this into something. But not in my mom's eyes. No. To her, it was another one of my pointless hobbies. You're wasting your time, Absalom, she said once, shaking her head. Nobody makes a living painting shoes. I'll never forget how she said it, like she was doing me a favor by being brutally honest. It wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration. My passions were a joke to her. By the time I hit high school, it was clear I wasn't going to follow the path she wanted for me. I wasn't interested in academics or sports. I wasn't Penelope, my older sister, who could do no wrong in Mom's eyes. Penelope was the golden child, straight A student, star athlete, class president. If there was a prize to win, Penelope won it. And then there was me. The artsy kid with paint-stained fingers who didn't care about grades or prom or any of the normal high school stuff. Mom loved Penelope. She tolerated me. Dinner conversations were always the same. Mom would gush about Penelope's latest achievements, her debate team victory, her scholarship offers, and then she'd turn to me with this look of pity. So, what are you going to do with your life, Absalom? She'd ask, like she was daring me to come up with something good. I'm thinking about starting a sneaker business, I said once. She laughed. Hard. Like I'd just told her I planned to become a circus clown. A sneaker business? Do you think you're Nike or something? I didn't say anything, but inside, I felt small. It's one thing to have strangers doubt you, it's another when it's your own mom. After high school, things didn't get better. Penelope went off to college on a full scholarship, and I stayed in Alabaster Ridge, working part-time at a hardware store. I was still customizing sneakers, but now I had to do it in the tiny corner of my bedroom in our cramped house. Mom's disappointment was practically oozing out of her. Every time I walked through the door after a shift, she'd sigh dramatically, like I was some burden she had to carry. You're almost 20, Absalom, she said one night as I sat at the table eating dinner. You can't keep working at that hardware store forever. When are you going to get a real job? I wanted to scream. Instead, I just said, I'm working on it. That wasn't enough for her. It was never enough. She didn't care about the hours I spent on my designs or the small but steady stream of orders I was getting from people in town. To her, it was all a distraction from the real world. Then came the breaking point. One night, after another exhausting lecture about how I was wasting my life, I pulled out my phone and decided to take a chance. I snapped a picture of one of my best designs, uploaded it to Instagram, and added the caption, Custom Sneakers by Absalom. DM for inquiries. I didn't think anything would come of it. But the next morning, I woke up to a message from a guy in Los Angeles. His name was Zeke, and he wanted a pair of sneakers for his girlfriend's birthday. He was willing to pay $150. It felt like the universe was throwing me a bone. I stayed up all night working on those sneakers, making them perfect. When I shipped them off, I was so nervous I felt sick. But a week later, Zeke posted a picture of the shoes on Instagram and tagged me. Best gift ever. Thanks, at Absalom Designs. That one post changed everything. Over the next few weeks, I got more messages. Orders started rolling in from people I'd never met. I was still broke and working at the hardware store, but for the first time, I felt like maybe I was onto something. I spent the next few years grinding. Every spare moment went into my designs. I experimented with new techniques, built a website, and started networking with other artists online. My bedroom looked like a war zone, with shoes, paints, and brushes scattered everywhere. Mom wasn't impressed. Even as the orders piled up, she refused to acknowledge what I was doing. "That's not a real business," she'd say. "It's a hobby, you can't rely on hobbies." I stopped trying to convince her. I knew she wouldn't believe in me until she saw the money, and even then, I wasn't sure it would be enough. But things were happening. My work started getting noticed by bigger names in the sneaker world. I landed a feature in a small fashion blog, then another. Word spread, and before I knew it, I was shipping orders across the country. When I was 25, I hit a major milestone, my first six-figure year. I quit my job at the hardware store, moved to a bigger city, and went all in on my brand. For the first time, I felt like I was living the life I'd dreamed of. That's when Mom's tone started to change. One day, out of the blue, she called me. "I saw your name in a magazine," she said, her voice unusually soft. "You've really made something of yourself." It felt weird. For years, all I'd wanted was her approval. Now that I had it, it felt hollow. Too little, too late. It wasn't long before the next call came. This time, she wasn't just congratulating me. She wanted something. "Absalom," she said, "I've been thinking. Maybe I could help you with your business. I've got experience, you know. I could do admin work, or maybe help with customer service." I almost dropped my phone. My mom, the same woman who had spent years mocking my pointless hobbies, now wanted to work for me? It was too perfect. Her offer to work for me was so ridiculous that I didn't respond right away. I mean, seriously? This woman, who spent my entire life tearing me down, now wanted to join my business. She didn't believe in me when I was struggling, but now that I was successful, she wanted a piece of it? I could have told her no. I could have hung up and let that be the end of it. But something in me snapped. I realized this wasn't just an opportunity to grow my business, it was a chance to make a point. So I said yes. I hired her. Not as an executive, not as a manager, but as my assistant. And I made sure she knew it wasn't a glamorous role. She was in charge of handling emails, answering customer inquiries, and, most importantly, packing and shipping orders. Yes, the same orders she once dismissed as pointless. The first day she showed up, I could see the shock on her face. She probably expected to walk into some sleek office with a fancy title waiting for her. Instead, she walked into my warehouse, a big, dusty space full of shelves stacked with sneakers and supplies. "Here's your workstation," I said, pointing to a desk covered in packing tape, boxes, and a shipping label printer. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face said it all. At first, she tried to play it cool. She'd talk about how proud she was of me, like this was all thanks to her tough love. I let her have her little delusion for a while. But as the weeks went by, the reality of the job started sinking in. It wasn't glamorous. It was hard, repetitive work. She was packing boxes for hours, answering emails from angry customers, and dealing with the kind of mundane tasks she probably thought were beneath her. One day, she came to me with a complaint. "Absalom," she said, "I think I'm more suited for a managerial role. You know, something where I can help make decisions." I looked her right in the eye and said, "Mom, you've got to earn that. This is where everyone starts." Her face turned red. She didn't argue, though. She knew she had no leverage. Over time, I started giving her the tasks I knew she'd hate the most. When we launched a new line of sneakers and orders poured in, guess who was responsible for packing every single box? Mom. When a customer demanded a replacement for a damaged pair, guess who had to deal with their angry emails? Mom. It wasn't just about making her work. It was about showing her, day in and day out, that the pointless hobby she mocked had grown into something real. Something that she now depended on for a paycheck. The breaking point came a few months later. We were gearing up for a big launch, a collaboration with a major streetwear brand. It was the biggest moment in my business so far, and I was pouring everything into it. Mom, on the other hand, was dragging her feet. She started showing up late, making excuses, and complaining about how exhausting the job was. One day, after she messed up a batch of shipping labels, I pulled her aside. "Mom," I said, "if this job is too much for you, maybe it's time to move on." She froze. "You're firing me?" I shrugged. "If you can't handle the workload, I need to find someone who can." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked scared. I could tell she hadn't expected this. She thought she could coast by on the fact that she was my mom. But this wasn't about family, it was about business. She didn't quit. Not right away, at least. But her attitude changed. She stopped complaining, as much, and started putting in more effort. She still wasn't great at the job, but at least she was trying. Meanwhile, my business kept growing. The collaboration was a massive success, and we started getting attention from even bigger brands. I hired more staff, expanded into new markets, and eventually opened my own storefront in Seattle. Mom stayed on as my assistant, but it was clear she wasn't happy. The power dynamic had shifted, and she didn't know how to handle it. For once, I was the one in control. The real moment of satisfaction came during a family dinner. Penelope was visiting from Seattle, and Mom, as usual, was trying to act like she was the mastermind behind my success. I always knew Absalom had talent, she said, smiling as she sipped her wine. I just had to push him to take it seriously. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full-on, belly laugh. Push me? I said. Mom, you spent my whole life telling me to give up. You called my business a joke. You laughed in my face when I told you my dreams. Don't sit here and act like you had anything to do with this. The room went silent. Penelope looked uncomfortable, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let Mom rewrite history. If anything, I continued, your doubt was the best thing that ever happened to me. It made me work harder to prove you wrong. So thanks for that, I guess. Mom didn't say anything. She just stared at her plate, her face flushed with embarrassment. For once, she didn't have a snarky comeback. Not long after that, she quit. She said it was too much stress and that she wanted to enjoy retirement. I didn't stop her. By then, I had a full team running the business, and I didn't need her anymore. I haven't heard her complain about my pointless hobbies since. These days, she brags about me to anyone who will listen, but I know the truth. She doesn't get credit for my success. She wasn't my mentor, my inspiration, or my support system. She was my motivation to prove her wrong. And I did. Story 2. I live in Oak Mill, a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. It's the kind of place where people keep to themselves. Lawns are tidy, neighbors wave but don't linger, and most drama happens behind closed doors. At least, that's how it was until Marcy Rylander decided I was her personal target. Marcy lived 2 doors down from me. She wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was the bad neighbor. Everyone in the cul-de-sac had a Marcy story, yelling at kids to get off the sidewalk, complaining about Christmas lights being too bright, even threatening to call the HOA because someone's trash can was out past 8 a.m. She thrived on making others miserable. For a while, I managed to avoid her. I wish I could say I kept it that way. This all started in February. I remember it was freezing, the kind of cold where your breath hangs in the air and everything feels like it takes twice as long. That morning, I was running late for work. My daughter, Elowen, had a science project due, and we'd spent half the night fixing a last-minute volcano disaster. When I stepped outside to leave, I saw it. My car. Rear bumper smashed in. Paint scraped clean off in places. I just stood there for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I noticed her car, a silver Cadillac SUV, parked at an awkward angle in front of my house. Her bumper had the exact same damage, right down to the matching streak of paint. I was furious. I marched over to her house, rang the doorbell, and waited. Marcy answered in a robe, sipping coffee like she had all the time in the world. Marcy, your car hit mine, I said, pointing back at the scene. I was trying to stay calm, but my voice was already shaking. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, that? Yeah, I saw that. But I didn't hit your car. I stared at her, dumbfounded. What do you mean, you didn't hit it? Your car's paint is on my bumper. My car hasn't moved. This is your doing. She shrugged and gave me the smuggest smile I've ever seen. Alaric, your car shouldn't have been so close to the street. If anything, it's your fault. Her audacity was unreal. My car was fully in my driveway, not even near the curb. Marcy, my car was parked legally. This isn't some debate. You hit it. That's when she laughed. Actually laughed. Prove it. I walked away before I said something I'd regret and called her insurance company. They sounded reasonable at first, but things went south fast. Marcy told them I'd moved my car after the crash to make it look like her fault. She claimed I was lying, that my car had rolled out of my driveway and hit hers. Apparently, without a witness or camera footage, it was her word against mine. I ended up filing the claim through my own insurance. They agreed to cover the repairs, but I had to pay the deductible upfront. It was frustrating, but I thought it was the end of it. Then, 2 weeks later, I got served. Marcy wasn't just content with denying responsibility, she sued me. For $15,000. She claimed my car had damaged her vehicle and caused her emotional distress. She even included compensation for loss of use, saying she couldn't drive her car because of what I'd done. I sat there staring at the paperwork, completely floored. Not only was she lying, but she was doubling down in a way that could ruin me financially. I'm a single dad. I don't have $15,000 lying around. And the nerve of it, suing me when she was the one who hit my car? There was no way I was letting this slide. I knew I needed evidence, and I needed it fast. First, I checked my home security cameras. My system wasn't fancy, but it was good enough. I found the footage from that morning, and sure enough, There it was, Marcy's Cadillac sideswiping my car as she tried to make a U-turn in the middle of the street. She hadn't even braked. My car didn't move an inch. It was all there on video, clear as day. But I didn't stop there. I started asking around the neighborhood and found a surprise witness, Mr. Dunleavy, the elderly man who lived across the street. He liked to sit by his window in the mornings with a cup of tea, and he'd seen the whole thing. She was in a rush, he told me. Didn't even look before she turned. She hit your car, stopped for a second, then parked like nothing happened. Thought you knew about it. I also tracked down the body shop Marcy had taken her car to. A little sweet talking with the receptionist revealed something interesting. She'd brought her car in for an estimate the same day as the crash. That proved she knew she was responsible. She wasn't just lying, she was premeditating this whole lawsuit. I hired a lawyer, Eliza Carrington, and handed everything over. When she saw the footage, she smiled. "Oh, this is going to be fun." By the time we got to court, I was nervous but ready. Marcy, on the other hand, walked in like she owned the place. She wore a designer suit, heels that clicked loudly on the floor, and carried a binder full of what I can only assume were lies. Her lawyer started by painting her as the victim. According to Marcy, she had been parked on the street, minding her own business, when my car suddenly rolled backward and smashed into hers. She claimed she was traumatized, inconvenienced, and left with a damaged car that I refused to pay for. She even pulled out a tissue at one point, dabbing at her eyes as if she was about to cry. When it was my turn, my lawyer played the footage. The room went silent as everyone watched Marcy's car veer into mine. You could hear a pin drop when the clip ended. Marcy's lawyer stammered, trying to spin the footage, but it was useless. Then we brought in Mr. Dunleavy, who calmly testified about what he saw. By the time he was done, Marcy's confident smirk was gone. Finally, my lawyer presented the timeline from the body shop. The repair estimate was timestamped before she even filed her insurance claim. That was the nail in the coffin. The judge hadn't ruled yet, but by the look on his face, I could tell Marcy's case was falling apart. Still, I couldn't relax. If there's one thing I've learned about Marcy, it's that she doesn't go down without a fight. After all the evidence was presented, Marcy's lawyer tried one last Hail Mary to save her case. He claimed the footage might have been tampered with and tried to discredit Mr. Dunleavy's testimony by bringing up his age. The judge wasn't buying it. "I've seen enough," he said, raising his hand to silence the courtroom. He glanced at Marcy, who was now shifting uncomfortably in her chair, the smugness completely wiped off her face. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the verdict. The judge ruled in my favor, but he didn't stop there. He called out Marcy for filing a baseless lawsuit and trying to manipulate the court. He not only dismissed her claim but ordered her to pay me $10,000, $5,000 for my legal fees and another $5,000 in damages for the stress and time wasted. She was also warned that if she pulled a stunt like this again, she could face serious legal consequences. I watched as her jaw dropped, and for the first time, she looked genuinely panicked. She tried to argue, but the judge shut her down. "Ms. Rylander, this court does not tolerate dishonesty. You should be thankful you're walking out of here without criminal charges." Her lawyer looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but in that courtroom. He quickly packed up his papers and avoided her gaze. Marcy paid me, but she didn't do it quietly. She left passive-aggressive notes in my mailbox, glared at me every time I passed her house, and even tried spreading rumors in the neighborhood that I had set her up. But nobody believed her. In fact, word about the trial spread, and her reputation took a nosedive. People who had been on the fence about her finally saw her true colors. I mentioned earlier that Marcy was always threatening to call the HOA about minor things. Well, it turns out karma was on my side. While digging through some paperwork, I found out that Marcy had been violating HOA rules for years. Her Cadillac was technically too large to park on the narrow street in front of her house, and she had an unauthorized shed in her backyard. I didn't even have to report her. After her court loss, several neighbors banded together and filed complaints against her with the HOA. The HOA slapped her with fines, and when she refused to pay, they escalated the matter. She tried fighting them, but by then, she had burned every bridge in the neighborhood. People stopped talking to her, avoided her at community events, and even kids crossing the street wouldn't walk past her house. She was completely isolated. A few months later, I noticed a moving truck outside her house. Marcy was leaving Oak Mill. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, not that anyone would have cared. She packed up her things and disappeared, leaving behind a battered reputation and a house nobody wanted to buy for months because of all the drama attached to her name. After she left, life in Oak Mill went back to normal. Actually, it got better. Without her constant meddling, the neighborhood felt lighter, friendlier. I used the $10,000 I won in court to fix up my car and treat my daughter to a much-needed vacation. We went to Florida, lounged on the beach, and laughed about the whole ordeal. Looking back, I can't believe how far Marcy went to try and ruin my life, but I'm glad I stood my ground. People like her thrive on intimidation and manipulation, and the best revenge is showing them they can't win. As for me, I still park my car in the same spot, but every time I see a silver SUV, I can't help but smile a little. Because now, every time Marcy thinks about Oak Mill, she'll remember the day she lost everything trying to mess with the wrong neighbor. And that, my friends, is how I turn the tables on Marcy Rylander.